Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is CraftyDasha, and with Christmas fast approaching, I wanted to share with you how I made this candy cane brooch. So if you're interested, get comfortable and get ready to enjoy some craft. So to begin the brooch, we will need some felt. This time I have chosen pure white felt with a thickness of 2 millimeters. This is probably a little thicker than what I normally like to use. I do like that when the brooches are thin. However, the candy cane itself is really narrow, so we will not have a lot of structure behind it, and to assist with it keeping its shape, I have chosen the thicker and very stiff felt. The next material I'm going to need is a plain HB type of pencil, which I will be using for tracing the candy cane onto my felt. So here comes the fun part of the project, which is choosing the materials we're going to use. I have chosen to stay with a classic candy cane color scheme, which is red and white. So I have chosen various French wires, such as the stiff French wire, the soft French wire or silken French wire, as well as various sizes of seed beads in both red, white and silver color schemes. I usually go for sizes 11, 8 and 15 to fill in those tiny spaces. I've got various roundel beads, once again in both white or clear and red. I've got check glass pearls. I have several rhinestone chains to choose from, and I think this time I will be using a clear rhinestone chain in white setting for the white parts of the candy cane, and a Siam colored rhinestone chain in red setting for the red parts of the candy cane. So I'm not sure if I will be using all of these materials yet. I am just going to make a start and let the ideas come to me as I'm working. Another material we will need is a bit of plastic or cardboard to give structure to the brooch. For the back of the brooch, I have chosen this silver pleather material. It's very sparkly, very Christmassy, so I think it will suit the brooch very well. Now this next material is not essential, but I like to use it nonetheless. I will be using red acrylic paint to paint on the red sections of the candy cane onto the felt, as I don't want to see bright white felt shining through red beads. For all sewing parts of this project, I will be using a fireline thread as well as a size 10 beading needle. For all gluing purposes, I will be using the E6000 glue. The final material we will need is a brooch pin. I have chosen one that is 4 centimeters long and in a silver color to match the rest of the brooch. For the sake of having a symmetrical candy cane, I have found a pattern I liked on Pinterest, I printed and cut it out. First, I will trace the pattern over onto my felt, and then I will turn the same piece of paper over to make a crisscross pattern of 2 candy canes. I then transfer the stripes of the candy cane onto my felt, but only approximately. When the pattern is fully transferred, I apply the red paint. Now here it's important not to apply the paint too thick, because it will further stiffen the felt and make it very difficult to pass the needle through it. When done painting, you can leave the paint to dry for a couple of hours, or you can speed up the process with a hairdryer, which is what I did. To give my brooch a contour, I used a stiff French wire in a silver color. To begin, I slightly stretch the French wire and then sew it on, following the contour and making stitches approximately every 2 or 3 millimeters apart. I did this first with the front candy cane and then repeated the process with the back candy cane. I'm done sewing on the French wire, and I'm really happy how seamless the candy canes look. I can now move on to the fun part of filling all the space with beads. Now going into this, I didn't really have a solid plan of what I was going to do, so I decided to focus on the front candy cane first. As you can see, I have already had a go putting the first bit of material down, which is this soft French wire. Today is actually my first time working with a soft French wire, so it's taking me a little bit of getting used to this. The soft or silken French wire is a very delicate material, so if you're not careful with it, you could bend it and damage it. Following the silken French wire, I decided to put a row of bicone beads in a cyan color. This was followed up by a row containing 2 check pearls in a red color, very Christmassy red color by the way. From this point onwards, it is important to be careful with how many beads you sew on, as overfilling the space could deform your work and make the French wire bend in strange ways. I myself actually had a couple of attempts at first sewing on some beads, only to decide that that was too much for the space that I had, and then go through the process of undoing all my stitches. It is better to do less and then come back at the end and fill in any of the remaining space with some seed beads, such as size 15 seed beads. Above the 2 check pearls, I decided to put another row of the silken French wire. I simply cut it to size and then sew it on as if it is a bugle bead. For the next red stripe, I decided to use a rhinestone chain. It seems to me like 4 red links is the perfect fit inside the space that I have. To attach the rhinestone chain, I first glue it with my E6000 glue, and then I follow this up with some stitches, 1 stitch in every space, as well as additional stitches grabbing the outer claws. I continue to sew on all of the red stripes on the candy cane using the same techniques and the same materials, only alternating the order in which I put down the materials. The top of the candy cane does not have very symmetrical stripes, instead they're more triangular shaped. This is to convey the dimension of the candy cane a little bit more. To get around beading these triangular sections, I use beads that go down in size, so at the widest point I put my 4mm check pearls, followed by size 8 seed beads, followed by size 11 seed beads. For the white stripes, I chose to use the following materials: 4mm check glass pearls in a white color, size 11 seed beads with a silk satin finish. Now these ones are not Miyuki's, they're Chinese made, which means they're not as symmetrical as the Japanese seed beads, but they're very pretty nonetheless. 3mm roundel beads. Now these ones are clear with an AB effect. Size 11 white seed beads with an AB finish. Size 15 silver lined seed beads. And a rhinestone chain, so clear stones in a white setting. I forgot to mention before, but all the rhinestone chains that I use for this project are the SS6 chains with a diameter of 2mm. I chose to apply the rhinestone chain first, as it requires the most amount of time for cutting, gluing and sewing. I wanted to also show you that before I sew anything down, I like to check that the beads I intend for this space will actually fit. So I feed the beads onto the needle and then just lay it against the space that I have to try and find out if this will fit perfectly. To give my candy canes more dimension and to differentiate between the front and the back, I decided to keep the back candy cane very simple and limit the seed bead size to only size 11. Here I use the silk satin finish white seed beads as well as red silver line seed beads. In addition, I use the silken French wires in both red and silver. Now that all the beads have been put down, it is time to fill in those tiny leftover spaces. In spaces that were large enough, I used the silken French wire, and in really tiny spaces, I used size 15 seed beads. Once all the sewing was done, it was time to cut the candy canes out. I used a pair of really sharp scissors and cut approximately 1mm away from the French wire. I made sure to leave this space not to cut through the thread that is holding the French wire down. Like I mentioned previously, the candy canes are quite narrow and they need something strong to give them structure. I will be using a bit of plastic to do so. Using a plain HB pencil, I trace my candy canes onto the plastic. However, when I do the cutting, I do not follow the line I drew. Instead, I cut inside it by approximately 2 millimeters. I do this so that the structure does not poke out from the sides of the candy cane. I want this to stay hidden. When I'm done with this preliminary cutting, I place my structure against the candy cane and look for spaces that still need more trimming. I mark these spaces with a pencil and then cut away with scissors once again. Because this plastic is really strong and thick, I will not be able to pass any needles through it when sewing on the brooch pin. To get around this, I will be using a hole punch to make holes in key areas for attaching the brooch pin. Next, I applied the glue on the back of the brooch as well as the structure and left this to dry under a press for a couple of hours. Next, I sewed on the brooch pin. I made sure to align the holes I punched with the holes on the pin. It was important to pass the needle through areas of beads rather than areas with a French wire, as the needle could damage it. This is what the brooch pin looked like when I was done sewing it on. As you can see, it is quite sturdy and it will not move anywhere. Now, this next part is not something I normally do with my brooches, but here I decided to sew around the structure to keep it from moving around. The reason I did this was because the candy canes are quite narrow and I didn't want to add more volume by beading around the edge. To attach the backing, we will once again need our pencil, glue and scissors. I have put the brooch as well as the backing back to back, exactly how I'd want to wear them. I then use my pencil to mark the structural components of the brooch pin that will need to pass through the backing. To cut out the holes, I fold my backing and then cut out a small triangle approximately 2 millimeters on each side, so that when I unfold it, it has a bit of a diamond shape to it. I then pass the top part of the brooch pin through this hole and it fits perfectly from the first try. Now, before cutting out the lower holes, I always like to check that the markings I made previously are still accurate. Now, as you can see, my original markings are actually a little bit off. So when I cut out the lower hole, I made sure to cut out the area that I actually needed, which was above those markings. Once the holes are done, I apply a generous amount of glue to the back of the brooch and glue it to the backing. To make sure that the glue sets and dries properly, I like to leave this under a press for a couple of hours. After the glue had dried, I cut off the extra fabric as close to the edge as possible. Finally, you can finish the edging of your brooch using your favorite method. This is how mine turned out. For some extra Christmas spirit, you can tie a ribbon of your choice around the middle of the candy canes. For ease of use, make sure that the ribbon passes underneath the brooch pin at the back. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy Crafting!